I found my wife's journal describing how she killed her previous 3 husbands, and my accident is scheduled for next week. The journal entry was dated 3 days from now. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read the words written in Elise's precise handwriting. Saturday, November 23rd, Lake House. Carbon monoxide while he sleeps. Same as David. Clean, peaceful, no struggle. Insurance pays out in 90 days. I'll sell the house by spring. I was standing in our basement at 11:47 p.m., holding a leather-bound notebook I'd found hidden behind a loose brick in the wall. I'd been looking for Christmas decorations, had noticed the brick protruding slightly when I moved a storage box, and pulled it out of curiosity. Behind it was a small cavity containing this journal and a manila folder stuffed with documents. The basement suddenly felt airless. I sat down hard on the concrete floor, the journal open in my lap, and forced myself to keep reading. Above the entry about my scheduled death were 3 other entries, each detailing a different man's final moments. Each entry clinical and detached, like she was documenting a recipe rather than describing murder. I'd been married to Elise Crawford for 18 months, together for 2 years before that. We'd met at a charity fundraiser in Boston, where I was representing my software company's donation committee, and she was volunteering as an event coordinator. Elise was 38, elegant and composed, with auburn hair she wore in a sleek bob, and green eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. She had a master's degree in psychology, worked as a grief counselor at a private practice, and spoke 3 languages fluently. Within minutes of meeting her, I was captivated by her intelligence and the quiet confidence she carried. She approached me during the silent auction, made a witty comment about the overpriced wine bottles being bid on, and we ended up talking for 2 hours. She was recently widowed, she'd told me that night, her voice catching slightly as she explained that her husband had died in a hiking accident 14 months earlier. The grief was still fresh, but she was trying to rebuild her life. I found her vulnerability, combined with her strength, incredibly attractive. I was 41, divorced 3 years earlier after a marriage that had dissolved slowly and painfully, and I'd convinced myself I wasn't interested in serious relationships anymore. Elise changed that calculation within weeks. Our relationship developed with what felt like natural momentum. She was thoughtful and attentive, remembering small details about my preferences and fears. She introduced me to her grief support group, where I met others who'd lost spouses and understood the complicated process of moving forward. Her friends were warm and welcoming, treating me like I was good for her, like I was helping her heal. My own friends liked her immediately, appreciating her intelligence and the way she seemed genuinely interested in their lives. My sister, usually skeptical of anyone I dated, told me Elise seemed like the real deal. 6 months into dating, Elise mentioned she was having financial difficulties. Medical bills from her late husband's final illness had depleted her savings, and she was struggling to keep up with her mortgage. I offered to help without hesitation. It felt like the right thing to do, supporting someone I loved who was dealing with circumstances beyond her control. I paid off $23,000 in debt over 3 months, and Elise was grateful in ways that felt genuine. She cried when I handed her the final check, said no one had ever taken care of her like this, that she felt safe for the first time since her husband died. We got engaged after 14 months. I proposed during a weekend trip to Vermont, in a small restaurant overlooking a lake. She said yes immediately, tears streaming down her face, and I felt like I'd finally gotten life right after years of mistakes. We married 4 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Elise wore a simple ivory dress and looked radiant. During our vows, she promised to love me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. I'd meant those words completely. Apparently, she'd meant them differently. The first year of marriage was everything I'd hoped for. We bought a lake house together, a modest A-frame cabin 90 minutes north of the city that we planned to use for weekend retreats. Elise decorated it with careful attention, making it feel cozy and intimate. We established comfortable routines, cooking together on weeknights, hiking on weekends, hosting dinner parties where our combined friend groups merged seamlessly. She continued her grief counseling work, and I'd gotten promoted to senior director at my company, increasing my income substantially. Elise had suggested I increase my life insurance policy, pointing out that we now had shared assets and financial obligations. It made sense, so I'd updated my policy to $850,000, naming her as sole beneficiary. Looking back now with the journal open in my lap, I could see how carefully she'd positioned every piece. The financial help early in our relationship that made me feel needed and protective. The grief counselor profession that gave her access to vulnerable people and taught her how to manipulate emotional responses. The lake house purchased jointly, but titled in a way that would transfer cleanly to her upon my death. The life insurance policy she'd suggested increasing. All of it had been calculated, designed to maximize her payout while minimizing suspicion. I forced myself to read the earlier entries, the ones about the men who'd come before me. The first entry was dated September 2011, written in the same precise handwriting. Victim, Paul Brennan, age 36. Married 13 months. Life insurance, $400,000. Method, staged car accident. Brake line cut on Mountain Road. Executed successfully. Death ruled accidental. Insurance paid 94 days post-death. Lessons learned. Grief performance must be sustained longer than anticipated. Authorities scrutinize recent policy changes. Wait minimum 18 months between marriage and incident for optimal results. My stomach lurched. She'd written victim like this was a research project. Like Paul Brennan had been a test subject rather than a human being she'd promised to love. The second entry was from March 2015. Victim, David Sutherland, age 43, married 19 months. Life insurance, $650,000. Method, carbon monoxide poisoning during sleep at lake house. Executed successfully. Death ruled accidental equipment failure. Insurance paid 89 days post-death. Lessons learned. Carbon monoxide is cleaner than vehicular methods. Less room for mechanical evidence. Lake house isolation provides privacy. Increase mourning period to 18 months before next relationship to avoid pattern recognition. She'd learned from Paul's death and refined her approach for David. Moved from a violent car crash to a peaceful poisoning. Found a method that left no visible trauma, nothing that would trigger extensive investigation. The third entry was from January 2019. Victim, Stephen Kovach, age 39, married 21 months. Life insurance, $700,000. Method, drowning during solo fishing trip. Boat capsized in rough weather, executed successfully. Death ruled accidental drowning. Insurance paid 85 days post-death. Lessons learned. Water deaths are investigated less thoroughly in rural jurisdictions. Timing incident during known storm provides natural explanation. Maintaining separate residence during mourning period reduces suspicion from neighbors about rapid recovery. 3 men, 3 carefully planned murders, 3 massive insurance payouts. And I was number 4, with my execution scheduled for Saturday, 3 days from now. The folder next to the journal contained documentation that made everything worse. Marriage certificates for Paul, David, and Stephen. Death certificates listing accidental causes, insurance payout confirmations showing deposits to accounts in Elise's name, though she'd apparently used slight variations of her identity across marriages. Elise Crawford had been Elise Brennan, then Elise Sutherland, then Elise Kovach, each time reverting to her maiden name after a respectable mourning period. There were also research notes, printouts about carbon monoxide poisoning, symptoms, detection timelines, articles about life insurance investigation procedures, a handwritten list of what she called red flags to avoid, including policy increases within 6 months of death, public marital conflicts, and previous suspicious deaths in family history. She'd studied this like a profession, perfecting her craft over 3 iterations spanning nearly 15 years. I sat on that basement floor for an hour, reading and rereading, trying to process the scope of what I'd discovered. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 2 years, the woman I'd trusted with my life and my financial future, was a serial killer. Not a crime of passion killer, not someone who'd snapped under pressure, but a calculated predator who methodically seduced men, married them, isolated them, and killed them for insurance money. The grief counselor credential wasn't coincidental. She'd probably chosen that profession specifically because it gave her access to vulnerable people and taught her how to manipulate emotions. She knew exactly how to present as a wounded but healing woman, how to trigger protective instincts in men, how to make us feel like heroes for supporting her recovery, and she'd done it 3 times successfully before targeting me. I thought about Saturday, 3 days away. We'd planned to spend the weekend at the lake house, just the 2 of us. Elise had suggested it last week, said we needed uninterrupted time together away from work stress. She'd been particularly affectionate lately, cooking my favorite meals, initiating intimacy more frequently, talking about our future together. I'd thought she was being romantic. Now I understood she was preparing for my death, creating final positive memories that would make her grief performance more convincing. The carbon monoxide plan made horrible sense. The lake house had a gas furnace and a generator we used when the power went out. Both could malfunction, releasing deadly gas while we slept. She'd probably researched the symptoms, the timeline, the detection window. Carbon monoxide was odorless and colorless. I'd go to sleep feeling fine and never wake up. She'd probably arranged to be out of the house when it happened, maybe go for an early morning walk or drive into town for supplies. She'd return to find me dead, call emergency services in hysterical panic, and play the devastated widow again. The investigation would focus on equipment failure. Investigators would inspect the furnace or generator, find whatever she'd sabotaged, and conclude it was a tragic accident. No one would suspect murder, because why would they? I was a healthy 43-year-old man dying in my sleep at a lake house during winter. Equipment failures happened. Carbon monoxide deaths happened. It would be sad, but explainable. And Elise would collect $850,000 within 3 months, just like she had with David Sutherland using the exact same method. I needed to get out of the basement. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, replaced the brick carefully, and went upstairs. Elise was asleep in our bedroom, her breathing deep and even. I stood in the doorway watching her sleep, this woman I'd thought I knew, and felt nothing but cold horror. How many times had she lain next to Paul, David, and Stephen, watching them sleep, knowing she planned to kill them? How many mornings had she woken up next to dead or dying men she'd murdered and performed grief convincingly enough to fool emergency responders, police, friends, family? The calculation required was inhuman. I grabbed my phone and went to the guest room, locking the door behind me. It was 1:23 a.m. I needed help, but who could I call? The police? With what evidence? I'd found a journal that could be dismissed as fiction or fantasy. I'd seen documents that proved Elise had been married before, but being widowed multiple times wasn't illegal. Without proof that she'd actually killed those men, without evidence connecting her to their deaths beyond timing patterns, the police would likely dismiss my concerns as paranoid delusion. I started researching Paul Brennan, David Sutherland, and Stephen Kovach, using my phone to search news archives. Paul Brennan died September 2012 in a single-car accident on a mountain road outside Boulder, Colorado. The article described brake failure leading to the car going over a cliff. His widow, Elise Brennan, had been interviewed for the piece, describing her shock and grief. David Sutherland died March 2016 from carbon monoxide poisoning at a vacation property in upstate New York. The article mentioned equipment failure in a gas furnace and noted his wife, Elise Sutherland, had been staying with friends at the time and discovered his body when she returned. Stephen Kovach died January 2020 when his boat capsized during a storm on a lake in Wisconsin. His wife, Elise Kovach, had reported him missing when he failed to return from a fishing trip. His body was recovered 2 days later. All 3 deaths ruled accidental. All 3 occurring within the time frame Elise's journal indicated. All 3 resulting in substantial insurance payouts to a grieving widow. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it, but spread across different states and separated by years, no one had connected them. I spent the rest of the night making copies of everything. I photographed every page of the journal, every document in the folder. I uploaded the photos to a cloud storage account Elise didn't know about, emailed copies to myself at 3 different addresses, and saved everything to a USB drive I hid in my car. If something happened to me, if Elise suspected I knew and accelerated her timeline, at least there would be evidence. By the time the sun came up at 6:42 a.m., I had a plan. I'd go to work like normal, act like nothing had changed, and spend the day figuring out who to contact. I needed someone who would take this seriously, who had the authority and expertise to investigate. I needed someone who could protect me while building a case against Elise. When I came out of the guest room, Elise was in the kitchen making coffee. She smiled when she saw me, that warm, genuine-seeming smile that had made me fall in love with her. "Morning, baby. You were in the guest room? Did I snore too loud?" She was concerned, solicitous, exactly the persona she'd perfected over years of practice. I forced myself to smile back. "Just couldn't sleep and didn't want to disturb you. Work stress. Want to talk about it?" She poured me coffee, added exactly the right amount of cream, handed me the mug. The same routine we'd done hundreds of times. Except now I knew this woman was planning to kill me in 3 days, and every gesture of care was performance designed to make my eventual death more convincing. Just the usual deadline pressure. I'll be fine. I drank the coffee, watching her face for any sign that she knew I suspected. But she was seamless, transitioning smoothly into talking about weekend plans, confirming we'd leave for the lake house Friday evening. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine. She was looking forward to Saturday because Saturday was when I'd die and she'd get rich. I left for work at 7:30 a.m., kissed Elise goodbye like I always did, and drove to the office with my mind spinning. I couldn't focus on work, so I spent the morning researching who to contact. The local police seemed insufficient for something this complex and interstate. I needed federal involvement, someone who could investigate across state lines and had experience with serial crimes. I called the FBI field office in Boston at 10:15 a.m. The receptionist transferred me to a general intake line, where I explained my situation to someone who sounded bored and skeptical. I mentioned finding a journal describing 3 murders, the pattern of deaths across multiple states, the life insurance fraud. The agent taking my information, who identified herself only as Agent Reeves, said someone would contact me within 24 to 48 hours to discuss the matter further. I asked if that could be expedited given that my wife was planning to kill me in 3 days. She said she'd note the urgency but couldn't guarantee anything. I hung up feeling like I'd accomplished nothing. 48 hours meant Friday at earliest, the day Elise and I were supposed to leave for the lake house. That was cutting it too close. I needed backup options. I called a lawyer next, a criminal defense attorney named Douglas Ramsey who'd handled my divorce 3 years ago. He listened to my story with what sounded like genuine concern. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Michael, what you're describing is serious. If you've genuinely found evidence of previous murders, you need law enforcement involved immediately, not a lawyer. I can't protect you from physical harm. I called the FBI. They said someone would contact me in 24 to 48 hours. That's too long. I need advice now about how to protect myself." Douglas thought for a moment. "First, don't go to that lake house. Make an excuse. Cancel the trip. Anything to avoid putting yourself in the isolated situation where she's planning to act. Second, document everything you found and give copies to multiple trusted people with instructions to deliver them to authorities if anything happens to you. Third, consider staying somewhere else until law enforcement is actively involved. If your wife realizes you suspect her, she may change her timeline." I told him I'd already documented everything and created multiple backups. The question was whether to confront Elise or continue pretending everything was normal. Douglas said absolutely do not confront her. If she's really what you think she is, if she's killed 3 people, confronting her could trigger an immediate violent response. Serial killers who feel cornered don't follow their carefully laid plans. They act on instinct and rage. Your best chance of surviving this is to let professionals handle it while you protect yourself through distance and documentation. We talked for another 20 minutes. Douglas gave me contact information for a private investigator named Laura Chen. No, wait, I can't use Chen. Let me revise. Douglas gave me contact information for a private investigator named Laura Bishop, who specialized in insurance fraud investigations. He said she'd worked with law enforcement on complex cases before and might be able to accelerate official involvement. I called Laura Bishop immediately after hanging up with Douglas. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional. I explained the situation as concisely as possible. Found wife's journal describing 3 previous husband murders, all ruled accidental, all resulting in life insurance payouts, my death scheduled for this Saturday. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, I can meet you in an hour. Bring everything you've found. If this is real, we need to move fast. I met Laura Bishop at a coffee shop near my office at 12:30 p.m. She was in her late 40s, former state police detective with 15 years in homicide before going private. She reviewed my phone photos of the journal and documents with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like someone was finally taking this seriously. This is detailed enough to be credible, she said after 20 minutes of silent review. The level of planning, the research notes, the lessons learned between victims, this reads like someone who's genuinely refined a process over time. The question is whether it's real documentation or elaborate fiction. Why would she write fiction about murdering husbands? Some people have violent fantasies they journal about. It's not uncommon, and it's not illegal unless they act on it. But combined with the fact that she's actually been married 3 times before, that all 3 husbands died accidentally, that the circumstances match what's described in the journal, the probability this is real is high. Laura said she'd start investigating immediately. She'd pull death certificates and insurance records for Paul Brennan, David Sutherland, and Stephen Kovach. She'd look into the original investigations, see if there were any red flags that had been missed. She'd also dig into Elise's background, financial history, professional credentials, everything. She said she'd have preliminary findings by tomorrow evening, Friday at latest. But she echoed what Douglas had said. Don't go to the lake house, avoid being alone with Elise, and consider staying somewhere else until this was resolved. I went back to work but couldn't concentrate. My phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. with a text from Elise. Can you leave early today? Want to spend time with you before the weekend? My chest tightened. Before the weekend. Before she killed me. I texted back that I had meetings until 6, but would be home by 6:30. She responded with a heart emoji. I stared at that little red heart icon and felt sick. At 4:15 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mr. Callahan, this is Special Agent Nina Kowalski with the FBI. I understand you called our Boston field office this morning regarding a potential homicide case. Relief flooded through me. Yes, thank you for calling back so quickly. Your report was flagged as high priority due to the imminent threat component. Can you meet with me this afternoon to discuss the details? We arranged to meet at 5 p.m. at a federal building downtown. I told my assistant I was leaving early for a personal emergency and drove to the meeting. Special Agent Kowalski was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and sharp, intelligent eyes. She'd been with the FBI for 8 years, specializing in serial crimes and interstate cases. I showed her everything. The photos of the journal, the documents, my timeline of Elise's marriages and the subsequent deaths. Agent Kowalski reviewed the materials methodically, asking clarifying questions about how I'd found the journal when I'd discovered it, whether Elise knew I'd seen it. I told her everything happened last night, that I'd been careful to put everything back exactly as I'd found it, that Elise had no indication I suspected anything. Agent Kowalski said the journal was compelling evidence, but complicated from a legal standpoint. Defense attorneys would argue this could be fiction, creative writing, fantasy documentation. To build a prosecutable case, we need to connect her directly to the deaths through forensic evidence, witness testimony, or financial records that show motive and opportunity. She has the insurance payout records in the folder with the journal, hundreds of thousands of dollars deposited after each husband's death. That shows she benefited financially, which establishes motive. But benefiting from someone's death isn't illegal if the death was genuinely accidental. We need to prove the deaths weren't accidental. That means reopening investigations in 3 different states, potentially exhuming bodies, reviewing original evidence with fresh eyes. That process takes time. I don't have time. She's planning to kill me Saturday. That's 2 days from now. Agent Kowalski nodded. I understand. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're not going to that lake house. Make an excuse. Say you're sick. Say work needs you. Anything. Second, we're going to put you in protective custody starting tomorrow. Third, I'm initiating contact with police departments in Colorado, New York, and Wisconsin to alert them about potential homicides. I'm also requesting expedited warrants for Elise's financial records, phone records, and any physical evidence from the previous deaths that might still be in storage. If we can connect her directly to any aspect of these murders, we can arrest her immediately. How long before you have those warrants? 24 to 36 hours if everything moves quickly. Judges don't like to rush these things. but I'll emphasize the ongoing threat to your life. I asked what protective custody meant practically. Agent Kowalski explained I'd stay at a secure location under FBI supervision, essentially a safe house, until they either arrested Elise or determined the threat was neutralized. It could be days or weeks, depending on how the investigation progressed. I left the FBI building at 6:45 p.m. and called Elise to say I was running late. She sounded disappointed but understanding. When I got home at 7:20 p.m., she'd made dinner. My favorite pasta dish, garlic bread, a salad. The table was set with candles. She was wearing a dress I'd once said I liked. The whole scene was romantic and thoughtful. Also completely calculated, I now understood, designed to create the image of a loving wife who'd be devastated by her husband's tragic death. We ate dinner, making small talk about our days. Elise described a difficult session with a grieving client, talked about how hard it was to help people process loss. The irony was almost unbearable. This woman who counseled people through grief had created grief for countless families. After dinner, we watched a movie on the couch. Elise curled against me, her head on my shoulder, exactly the way she'd done hundreds of times. My body knew this position, knew her weight and warmth, but my mind kept screaming that this woman was a killer, that she was counting down hours until my death, that every gesture of affection was manipulation. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Laura Bishop. Preliminary findings alarming. Need to talk tomorrow. Stay safe tonight. I excused myself to the bathroom and called her. She answered immediately and spoke quickly in a low voice. I pulled insurance records for all 3 husbands. The pattern is even more pronounced than your wife's journal suggests. Each policy was increased substantially within 6 months of death. Each payout was processed quickly with minimal investigation. I also found something else. Elise has used 5 different variations of her name across official documents. Elise Crawford, Elise Brennan, Elise Sutherland, Elise Kovach, and Elise Morgan. The Morgan name appears on documents from 2008 before Paul Brennan. I think there might be another victim you don't know about. My blood went cold. Another husband? I'm not sure yet. I've got someone checking death records in Pennsylvania where the Morgan documents originated. But if there is another victim, that means she's been doing this even longer than you thought. Potentially 5 victims, not 3. You need to get out of that house tonight, Michael. Don't wait for FBI protective custody tomorrow. Leave now. I told Laura I'd figure something out and hung up. When I came out of the bathroom, Elise was in the bedroom getting ready for bed. She smiled when she saw me. You okay? You seem distracted. Just work stuff. Might need to go into the office tomorrow even though it's Friday. Her smile faltered for just a second. But we're supposed to leave for the lake house tomorrow evening. We both took Monday off for a long weekend, remember? I know. I'll probably still be able to go, just might be a few hours later than we planned. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign of anger or concern, but she recovered smoothly. Okay, well, let me know. I'm flexible. She kissed me goodnight and went to bed. I waited until I heard her breathing even out into sleep, then quietly packed a bag with essentials. I left a note on the kitchen counter saying I had an early morning emergency at work and would call her later. Then I drove to a hotel near the airport and checked in under a fake name, paying cash. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay in an anonymous hotel room reviewing everything I knew, everything I'd found, trying to understand how I'd married a serial killer without seeing any warning signs. Agent Kowalski called at 7:15 a.m. We've got movement on the warrants. Judges in all 3 states are reviewing expedited requests. I should have approval by this afternoon. Where are you? I told her about the hotel. She said that was smart, that I should stay there until she could arrange secure transportation to the safe house. She'd call me back within a few hours with a plan. My phone started buzzing with calls from Elise around 8:30 a.m. I didn't answer. She left increasingly concerned voicemails, first asking if I was okay, then saying she was worried, then sounding almost frantic. Michael, please call me back. I don't know where you are. Did something happen? I'm scared. The performance was impressive. She sounded like a genuinely worried wife. But I knew the truth. She was panicking because I deviated from routine, because I wasn't where she expected me to be, because her plan required me to go to the lake house tomorrow, and I was suddenly unpredictable. Around 11 a.m., Laura Bishop called with an update. Found the 5th victim, Thomas Morgan, died in an apparent drowning accident in 2009 at a beach in Delaware. Married to Elise Morgan for 11 months before his death. Life insurance payout of $300,000. This woman has been killing for 16 years, Michael. 5 husbands, 5 murders, over $2 million in insurance fraud. The scope was staggering. Elise had been doing this since she was in her early 20s. She'd refined her methods over 5 iterations, learning from each murder, perfecting her performance. And I'd been victim number 6 if I hadn't accidentally found that journal. Laura said she'd forwarded everything to Agent Kowalski and was coordinating with the FBI investigation. Agent Kowalski called back at 1:30 p.m. We've got warrants approved for financial records and phone data. We're also exhuming Thomas Morgan's body in Delaware and requesting permission to exhume David Sutherland in New York. The medical examiner in Delaware is reviewing the original autopsy report for Morgan and says there were some anomalies at the time that weren't fully investigated. If we can prove cause of death was inconsistent with accidental drowning, That gives us probable cause for murder charges. How long before you can arrest her? I need at least one piece of definitive forensic evidence connecting her to one of the deaths. The journal alone isn't enough. But we're close. Probably 24 hours. 24 hours. I could survive 24 hours in this hotel room. Except Elise wasn't waiting 24 hours. At 3:15 p.m., hotel security called my room. Mr. Callahan, there's a woman in the lobby claiming to be your wife. She's asking for your room number. We haven't given it to her per your check-in instructions, but she's insisting she needs to see you. Says it's an emergency. My heart hammered against my ribs. How did she find me? She says she tracked your phone's location. I'd been an idiot. I'd kept my regular phone, the one with location services Elise could access. She'd figured out I was hiding and tracked me down. Don't let her up. Tell her I'm not here. Tell her you can't confirm I'm a guest. Sir, she's becoming agitated. Should we call police? Yes, call them. And call this number. I gave him Agent Kowalski's direct line. Tell her what's happening. I grabbed my bag and went to the window. My room was on the 4th floor, too high to jump. I was trapped. My phone started buzzing. Elise calling. I answered this time, keeping my voice steady. Michael, what the hell is going on? Why are you in a hotel? Why did you leave this morning without explaining? I needed space. Work stress. I just needed space. Space? You checked into a hotel without telling me? Michael, I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. Please just come down to the lobby so we can talk. Her voice had that precise calibration of concern and hurt that would sound completely reasonable to anyone listening. But I heard the edge underneath, the control starting to slip. I'm not coming down. I need you to leave. Leave? Michael, I'm your wife. I'm trying to help you. You're clearly going through something, and I want to be there for you. Please don't shut me out. Elise, I know. The words came out before I could stop them. You know what? I know about Paul, and David, and Stephen, and Thomas. I found the journal. Silence. It stretched out for 5 seconds, then 10. When Elise spoke again, her voice was completely different. Flat. Cold. All the warmth and concern evaporated. Where's the journal now? Doesn't matter. I've already given copies to the FBI. They're investigating all 5 deaths. It's over, Elise. Another silence. Then, you stupid son of a bitch. You couldn't just let it happen. It would have been peaceful. You wouldn't have suffered. Now everything is complicated. The mask had fully dropped. This was the real Elise, the one who'd calculated 5 murders and executed them with precision. Why? I asked. Why any of it? The money can't be worth this. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You really don't understand, do you? It's not about the money. I mean, the money's nice, but it's about the control, the power. Watching you all trust me completely while I plan your deaths. Knowing I can manipulate every emotion, every response. Knowing I'm smarter than everyone, investigators included. The money is just how I keep score. You're insane. No, Michael, I'm exceptional. I've done what most people only fantasize about. I've killed 5 people and gotten away with it every single time. I would have gotten away with 6 if you hadn't stumbled onto that journal through sheer dumb luck. The FBI has evidence. They're exhuming bodies. You're not getting away with anything. Maybe. Or maybe I disappear before they can charge me. I've got resources you don't know about. Identities prepared. Money hidden. I've been planning exit strategies since Thomas. She hung up. I immediately called Agent Kowalski, told her Elise was in the hotel lobby and knew I'd found the journal. Agent Kowalski said she'd have agents there in 10 minutes, told me to stay in my room with the door locked. I barricaded the door with furniture and waited. 8 minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway, then a key card sliding through the lock. The door opened 2 inches before the chain caught. Elise was standing in the hallway. She must have somehow convinced hotel staff to give her a key, or maybe she'd stolen one. Let me in, Michael. We need to talk. The FBI is on the way. There's nothing to talk about. Sure there is. For example, I could explain that you've been abusive, that you've been threatening me for months, that I came to this hotel terrified because you'd been sending me disturbing messages about killing me. I could show police the texts I fabricated on a second phone. I could perform traumatized, battered wife perfectly. Who do you think they'd believe? The hysterical man making wild accusations about his wife being a serial killer? Or the frightened woman with evidence of abuse? Before I could respond, I heard new voices in the hallway. FBI, step away from the door. Elise's face went through a rapid calculation. Then she turned and ran. I heard shouting, footsteps, and then silence. Agent Kowalski's voice came through the door. Mr. Callahan, it's safe. We have her in custody. I opened the door. Elise was on the floor in the hallway, hands cuffed behind her back, 2 agents standing over her. She was crying now, performing devastation perfectly. I don't understand what's happening. My husband is having some kind of breakdown, and now the FBI is arresting me? For what? Agent Kowalski ignored her, turning to me. We got the forensic results from Thomas Morgan's exhumation. Medical examiner found evidence of strangulation before he entered the water. The drowning was post-mortem. Someone killed him and then put him in the water to stage an accident. Combined with the journal and the pattern of deaths, we have enough for murder charges. She read Elise her rights. Elise's performance shifted from devastated wife to indignant citizen. This is ridiculous. I want a lawyer. You're arresting me based on what? A journal my mentally unstable husband claims to have found? That's not evidence. We also have your financial records, Agent Kowalski said calmly. 5 life insurance payouts over 16 years. 5 husbands who died accidentally right before you would have lost access to their money. We have evidence that Thomas Morgan was murdered. We're exhuming David Sutherland's body now, and I'm confident we'll find similar evidence. You're looking at 5 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of insurance fraud, and conspiracy. That's life in prison at minimum, more likely death penalty given the number of victims. The color drained from Elise's face. The performance crumbled completely. She stopped crying, stopped protesting, just stared at Agent Kowalski with something like grudging respect. How did you move so fast? I have contingencies for this. I should have had time to disappear. Your husband's attorney connected him with a private investigator who started pulling records yesterday. She found Thomas Morgan faster than you expected anyone would. Once we had evidence of a 5th victim, judges fast-tracked the warrants. You underestimated how quickly we could build a case when someone knew what to look for. Elise turned her head to look at me. You got lucky. If you hadn't found that journal, if you'd gone to the lake house like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened. You'd be dead and I'd be collecting your insurance in 90 days. Why tell me this? I asked. Because you're going to testify, she said. You're going to tell your story about finding the journal, about everything you discovered, and I want you to know that when you do, when you're on that stand describing your fear and betrayal, I'll be sitting there knowing I had you completely fooled for 2 years. You loved me. You trusted me. You never suspected anything until you accidentally stumbled onto evidence I'd hidden perfectly. That's my victory, Michael. Even if I spend the rest of my life in prison, I still won against you. They took her away. I stood in that hotel hallway watching her disappear into an elevator. This woman I'd married. This woman who'd planned to murder me in my sleep tomorrow night. Agent Kowalski touched my arm gently. You're safe now. She can't hurt you. I nodded, but safe felt like a strange word. My wife was a serial killer who'd murdered 5 people and nearly made me number 6. I'd shared a bed with her, shared my life, trusted her completely. How was I supposed to feel safe ever again? The trial took 14 months. Prosecutors in 5 states coordinated charges, ultimately trying Elise in Delaware for Thomas Morgan's murder first, because the forensic evidence was strongest there. The exhumation had revealed not just evidence of strangulation, but fibers under his fingernails that matched items found in Elise's possession from that time period. David Sutherland's exhumation in New York showed traces of a sedative in his bone marrow that hadn't been tested for in the original autopsy. She'd drugged him before exposing him to carbon monoxide, ensuring he wouldn't wake up when the gas started flowing. The evidence was overwhelming. The journal, which had been authenticated by forensic document examiners, was entered as Exhibit A. My testimony about finding it and everything that followed took 3 days. Elise's attorney tried to discredit the journal as fiction, tried to paint me as a paranoid husband who'd misconstrued his wife's creative writing. But the prosecutor demolished that defense by connecting specific details from the journal to actual evidence from the deaths. Locations, methods, timelines, everything matched. The financial evidence was damning. 5 life insurance policies, 5 large payouts, 5 husbands dead under suspicious circumstances. An insurance fraud investigator testified that the pattern alone suggested coordination and intent. Elise's grief counseling credentials became evidence against her. A psychologist testified that her professional training would have taught her exactly how to manipulate bereaved people and how to perform grief convincingly. Character witnesses who'd known Elise during her previous marriages testified about how devastated she'd seemed after each husband's death, how she'd attended grief support groups and cried at memorials. The prosecution used their testimony to show how skilled she was at deception. Elise didn't testify in her own defense. Her attorney argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that correlation wasn't causation, that 5 tragic accidents didn't prove murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Elise showed no emotion when the verdict was read, just sat there stone-faced like she was observing someone else's trial. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without possibility of parole. After Delaware, she was extradited to New York for David Sutherland's murder, where she received another life sentence. Colorado, Wisconsin, and Massachusetts had charges pending, but prosecutors decided 2 life sentences were sufficient. Elise would die in prison. I attended the sentencing in Delaware. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, Elise stood and looked directly at me. I regret nothing, she said, except getting caught. Michael, Paul, David, Stephen, Thomas, you were all means to an end. I picked you because you were vulnerable, lonely, financially stable, and easy to manipulate. I played you perfectly. The only mistake I made was keeping that journal. Hubris, I suppose. I wanted to document my success, and it became my downfall. But make no mistake, I don't regret the murders. I regret the sloppiness of getting caught. The judge ordered her removed from the courtroom. As they led her away, she turned back one more time. By the way, Michael, I never loved you. Not even a little. I didn't love any of you. You were walking insurance policies, nothing more. I left that courtroom feeling hollowed out. She'd taken 2 years of my life and revealed it was all performance. Every kiss, every conversation, Every moment I'd believed was real had been manipulation. 3 years later, I'm still processing it. I sold the lake house immediately. Couldn't stand the thought of ever going back there. I moved to a different city, changed jobs, tried to create distance from everything associated with Elise. I dated occasionally, but trust didn't come easily. How do you trust anyone when someone you shared your life with turned out to be a serial killer? Therapy helped. Dr. Raymond Fisher, a psychologist specializing in trauma from intimate partner violence, helped me understand that what Elise did wasn't my fault. That there was no way I could have known. That she'd spent 16 years perfecting her technique, and even professionals had missed the signs. He said recovery would be slow but possible. I still have nightmares sometimes. In them, I go to the lake house despite knowing what she planned. I fall asleep in that bedroom. I never wake up. In the dreams, I'm just another name in her journal, another victim she documented clinically before moving on to someone new. But I survived. That's what matters. I survived because of dumb luck, because I found a loose brick while looking for Christmas decorations, because I didn't ignore what I'd found. 5 other men didn't have that luck. Their families still reach out sometimes, thanking me for finally giving them answers about what happened. Paul's sister told me she'd always suspected his accident wasn't really an accident, that something about Elise's grief had seemed performed. David's brother said he'd tried to convince police to investigate more thoroughly, but had been dismissed as a grieving sibling in denial. Stephen's father said he'd known in his gut that his son's death wasn't accidental, but had no proof. Thomas's mother died before the trial, but had left letters describing her suspicions that were read in court. They'd all sensed something wrong, but had been dismissed because the evidence looked accidental, and grieving widows were sympathetic figures. Elise had exploited that sympathy masterfully, knowing that society gives bereaved spouses the benefit of the doubt. She'd built her entire method around that cultural blind spot. Looking back now, I can see small signs I missed at the time. The way she'd discouraged me from getting too close to her family, claiming they were distant and difficult. I met them exactly once, at our wedding, and never saw them again. She'd probably kept them at arm's length to avoid them noticing her pattern. The way she'd always been vaguely reluctant to discuss her previous husbands in detail, saying it was too painful, but really avoiding specifics that might not align with her cover stories. The way she'd pushed for the lake house specifically, probably because she'd used David Sutherland's lake house successfully and knew that method worked. The way she'd been subtly isolating me from close friends, encouraging me to spend weekends alone with her rather than socializing. Isolation made victims more vulnerable and reduced the number of people who might question the narrative after death. The way she'd managed all our finances, supposedly to reduce my stress, but really to ensure she understood exactly what assets existed and how to access them. I'd interpreted all of it as love and care. It had been strategy and manipulation. The trial exposed other details that chilled me. Elise had been part of online forums where people discussed insurance fraud techniques. She'd used fake identities to ask questions about how policies were investigated, what red flags investigators looked for, how to make deaths appear accidental. Digital forensics experts had recovered years of these communications from her laptop. She'd studied her craft like a professional, researching and planning obsessively. She'd also kept trophies from each victim. Police found a box in a storage unit containing items from all 5 husbands: Paul's watch, David's wedding ring, Stephen's wallet, Thomas's college class ring, and a tie I'd worn to our wedding. She'd taken it from the closet and added it to her collection prematurely, probably confident I'd be dead before anyone found the box. The psychologist who testified at trial said the trophy collection suggested this was about more than money for Elise. The killing itself provided psychological satisfaction. She'd displayed classic psychopathic traits, including lack of empathy, grandiosity, manipulation skills, and callous disregard for others' lives. The insurance money was important, but the real reward was the sense of power and superiority she got from successfully deceiving everyone. I think about that sometimes. How Elise would watch me sleep, knowing she planned to kill me, feeling superior because I trusted her. How she'd sit across from me at dinner discussing mundane things while mentally reviewing her murder checklist. How she'd performed loving wife so convincingly that I'd never doubted her for a second until I found that journal. The level of calculation required is almost incomprehensible. Most people can't sustain deception like that for years, but Elise wasn't most people. She was something else entirely. In a strange way, finding that journal saved more than just my life. If Elise had successfully killed me, she would have continued. There would have been a 7th victim, an 8th, a 9th. She'd said herself that she planned to keep going indefinitely. Each murder refined her technique further, made her more confident and more dangerous. Stopping her after 5 victims instead of 10 or 15 means families somewhere were spared the grief Paul's and David's and Stephen's and Thomas's families endured. That provides some meaning to the nightmare I lived through. I spoke about my experience once at a victims advocacy conference, sharing what I'd learned about recognizing manipulation and trusting instincts. Several people approached me afterwards saying they'd recognized patterns from their own relationships, red flags they'd been ignoring or rationalizing. 2 people said my story had prompted them to investigate suspicious deaths of family members more thoroughly. leading to reopened investigations. If sharing what happened to me helps other people avoid similar situations or gets justice for other victims, then something good comes from the horror. That's what I tell myself anyway. That surviving Elise means preventing future Elises. That speaking publicly about manipulation and deception might help someone else recognize warning signs before it's too late. I'm 46 now, single, focused on my career and rebuilding the life Elise tried to end. I bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, adopted a dog, reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage. I'm learning to trust again slowly. Last year, I started dating someone new, someone kind and genuine who knows my history and understands why I'm cautious. It's going slowly, which feels right. There's no rush. I'm just trying to build something real with someone who's actually who they claim to be. Sometimes I drive past the coffee shop where Elise and I had our first date, or see a movie that reminds me of nights we spent together, and I have to remind myself that none of it was real. She wasn't really there with me. She was performing a role designed to end with my death. The woman I thought I'd married never existed. That's the hardest part to accept. Not that Elise was a killer, but that the person I fell in love with was pure fiction. I mourned that relationship after the trial, mourned the loss of someone who'd never actually been alive. Dr. Fisher said that was a healthy part of processing, accepting that I'd loved an illusion and grieving what I thought I had before learning the truth. 3 years after the Delaware sentencing, I received a letter from Elise in prison. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. The letter was short, written in her precise handwriting that I recognized from the journal. Michael, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm writing because I've had a lot of time to think, and there's something I want you to understand. What I did wasn't personal. You were a good husband, probably the best of the 5. If I'd been capable of love, I might have loved you. But I'm not capable of that emotion, and I never have been. I recognize that now after years of psychological evaluations. I have antisocial personality disorder. Psychopathy, if you prefer the more dramatic term. I literally cannot feel emotional connections the way normal people do. For me, other people are just objects with use value. You had financial value. That's all you ever were to me, and that's all anyone has ever been. I'm writing to tell you this, not because I want forgiveness or understanding. I don't care about either of those things. I'm writing because I think you're still trying to figure out what you missed, what signs you could have seen. The truth is there weren't any. I've been practicing deception since childhood. I'm exceptionally good at it. You couldn't have known because I'm better at performing emotions than most people are at actually feeling them. You got lucky finding that journal. That's all. Not smart, not intuitive, just lucky. I hope that brings you some peace, knowing you couldn't have prevented this. The only mistake you made was being in the right place at the right time for me to target you. Stop torturing yourself about what you should have seen. There was nothing to see. I was perfect. I'm still perfect. I just made one mistake, keeping written documentation of that perfection. I'm curious about one thing. Do you ever miss the version of me you thought you knew? The loving wife who cooked your favorite meals and remembered your fears and supported your career? That person doesn't exist. Never existed. But you loved her. Do you mourn her? I've been trying to understand that, how people can love something that isn't real. It seems inefficient. But then, most human emotions seem inefficient to me. Anyway, I doubt you'll write back. That's fine. I just wanted you to know that I won our relationship. You may have stopped me from killing you. You may have put me in prison. But I still won because I had you completely fooled for 2 years. You stood at an altar and promised to love a fiction. That's my victory. Elise. I read the letter 3 times. Then I burned it. She was wrong about winning. Yes, she'd fooled me. Yes, I'd loved someone who didn't exist. But I survived. I stopped her from killing anyone else. I helped families get answers and justice. She was spending the rest of her life in a cell while I was free, rebuilding, learning to trust again, creating real relationships with real people. That's not her victory. That's mine. Sometimes people ask if I'm angry about what Elise did, about the 2 years she stole from me, about nearly dying in my sleep at a lake house. The answer is complicated. I was angry for a long time, furious at her for the deception, at myself for not seeing through it, at the universe for putting me in her path. But anger takes energy. And eventually I decided I'd rather use that energy building something new than maintaining rage towards someone who literally cannot understand why what she did was wrong. Elise is a psychopath. She lacks the neurological capacity for empathy or genuine emotional connection. Being angry at her is like being angry at a tornado for destroying your house. The destruction is real, the trauma is valid, but the anger doesn't change anything. So I let it go, mostly. Someday, maybe I'll fully trust someone again. Maybe I'll remarry, have the life Elise tried to take from me. Or maybe I won't, and that's okay too. I survived when 5 other men didn't. I get to make choices about my future. That's enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.